Parts of East Africa's largest economy, Kenya, do continue to hurtle towards a deepening food supply shortfall and malnutrition crisis following a below-average long-rain season and a surge in the prices of fuel and fertilizer. Here's a look at some of the numbers. By July, at least 940,000 children in Kenya were acutely malnourished. Between March and May, the number of food insecure Kenyans had gone up by nearly a third to 4.1 million. Partly as a result of poor rains and unaffordable fertilizer prices, maize prices in the market had soared by anywhere between 30 to 125% over the 5-year average. An estimated 2.4 million livestock had also died by the end of May, as the worst drought in the Horn of Africa in 4 decades dragged on, with a 5th consecutive below-average rainy season also forecast. Some hours ago, I spoke to the executive director of the East African Grain Council. I started our conversation by exploring what the harvest outlook was like for one of the country's main staples, maize.
We are estimating that the harvest will be most likely, at best, maybe we will be able to do like 30 to 35, almost 40% below expectations.
All right, so in terms of bags or metric tons, what does that translate to? How close are we or how far off are we from that 4 million metric tons of maize demand that we usually have in the market?
In terms of tonnage, we haven't yet done the calculations, but we see we may not even hit 3 million. So we will have a bigger deficit than we ordinarily have as a country over the years.
Let's focus on the region, because as you mentioned, we are always in deficit particularly hard years. 2017 comes to mind. You import something like 700,000 tons of maize into the country. What's the harvest outlook like in our nearest markets, Uganda, Tanzania and Zambia? Will they be able to provide that surplus into the Kenyan market at current prices?
If I may go country by country, for Uganda, they have had 2 consecutive very bad seasons. They had a drought season, and so there's not much grain that we are looking to get out of Uganda. In fact, in the last couple of weeks, EAGC has been facilitating trade into Uganda for maize. So for the first time in a couple of years, Uganda has had to look out as far as Zambia to source maize for their requirements. Tanzania's harvest has just been completed. The stocks currently have started flowing in, and we have seen an impact in prices in the last 2 weeks, where prices have dropped down from around 55,500 shilling a bag of 90 kilo, going down now to something like 5,200, which is what is a price that opened this week. And so we see that that price might keep going lower as harvests, as supplies increase out of Tanzania. Going down to Zambia, Malawi, they do have stocks and they have quite some competitive pricing. The challenge we are having is the cost of logistics to move maize from Zambia, Malawi up to Kenya and into the Eastern Africa region.
All right, then. So with prices this high, though, how are both farmers and households responding? Because if you're having to pay, this translates to roughly $550 a ton. If you're having to pay that much for maize at household level, it's an incentive to switch to other starches like potatoes, for example. And if you're a farmer, perhaps, you look at the fertilizer problems, you look at the fuel problems, you're probably saying, I'm better off growing something else that's not quite as labor intensive. So are we seeing any switching out from maize on both the consumer side and the farmer side?
Indeed, yes, we have seen those effects coming in. Starting with the consumer, we have seen a lot of interaction now between the consumption or sort of substitution between maize and wheat and between maize and rice and other kind of grains and sources of carbohydrates and energy. Although there is still always that preference to maize, there are those who say that unless they eat ugali, they haven't had food. But yes, at consumer level, we've seen that shift. But we've also seen another adjustment at consumer level where, because of the very high cost of living being driven up by the cost of fuel and all those other related factors, really consumers are hard hit. Your common mwananchi is so extremely hit that we are seeing people having to even adjust their consumption patterns. People are having to even skip meals just to sort of survive. So we've seen even a reduction in the demand of maize flour.